The air in the lawyer's office tasted like old money and betrayal. It was thick, silent, except for the rustle of papers and the muted city sounds outside. I sat across from Robert Sterling's attorney, the man who now held the keys to the life Robert and I built, the life that had ended just days ago when his heart simply stopped. My sister, Clara, sat beside me. She was dressed in black, a veil doing little to hide the dry eyes that contradicted her performative sniffles. Grief hadn't touched her. It had consumed me, hollowed me out, but she looked expectant, like a vulture waiting for scraps. I should have known then. I should have seen it in the way she eyed the heavy briefcases, the way her fingers drummed a silent, greedy rhythm on her knee. The attorney cleared his throat, his voice a low drone cutting through the heavy air. He read the standard stuff first. Assets. Holdings. Trusts. Robert had been successful. Very successful. The numbers floated around the room, abstract and vast, meaningless, without him here to share them. His fortune, $100 million give or take, was now mine. His wife. His partner. His love. That was the plan. The only plan. Then, Clara leaned forward. The air shifted. The attorney paused. My blood ran cold, a different kind of cold than grief. This was the predator's cold. She spoke, her voice soft, dripping with false sorrow. There's something you all need to know. She dabbed at her eye with a pristine tissue. Robert and I, we shared a secret. My stomach twisted. Shared a secret? With Clara? My sister? The sister I hadn't been close to in years. The one who only reappeared when she needed something. She looked at the attorney, then at me, a flicker of something sharp and cruel in her gaze before she masked it with practiced sorrow. Robert was the father of my child. My little Lily. She is his daughter. The room tilted. The numbers, the briefcases, the somber attorney, they all spun. My husband? Robert? The father of her child. A gasp escaped me, choked and disbelieving.
No. Impossible.
She held up a document. A birth certificate. Robert's name was listed as the father. And then a DNA test result, presented with a flourish that made my skin crawl. It showed a high probability match. Paternity confirmed. My mind raced. Robert. My Robert. The man who held me every night. The man who dreamed with me of a future we both knew would never include tiny footsteps in our home. The man who shared the quiet, painful truth with me years ago, after countless doctors, countless tests, countless dashed hopes.
He was sterile.
The word echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of my head. Sterile. Medically, definitively, irrevocably unable to father a child. We had cried together about it. We had mourned the future we couldn't have. We had accepted it, found peace in it, decided our life together, just the two of us, was more than enough. It was our secret, born of vulnerability and shared pain. And now this monstrous lie. Clara was still talking, her voice gaining strength, losing the feigned fragility. As the mother of his only child and his heir, she looked directly at me now, a smirk playing on her lips, undisguised. I am claiming Lily's rightful inheritance. 50% of Robert's estate. Half of everything. $50 million. The shock, the betrayal, the sheer, mind-boggling audacity of it hit me with the force of a physical blow. My sister. My own sister. Waiting for my husband to die, then pouncing like this? Using a child, a lie, to steal half of everything we built? Half of his legacy. My first instinct wasn't tears. It wasn't even anger, not yet. It was a laugh. A small, shaky sound at first, trapped in my chest, then bubbling up, uncontrollable, hysterical. It wasn't mirth. It was the sound of the universe snapping into horrifying, impossible focus. The sound of witnessing something so profoundly evil, so utterly ridiculous in its foundation, that laughter was the only possible, immediate response before the tears or the rage could come. I laughed. I looked at my sister, at her smug, triumphant face, and I laughed. She flinched, her expression shifting from predatory confidence to startled confusion. The attorney looked uncomfortable, shuffling papers. You think this is funny? Clara stammered, her voice sharp with sudden defensiveness. I stopped laughing, but the echo of it lingered in the air, a dark counterpoint to her demand. My eyes, still blurry with grief, focused on her face, on the features so like my own, twisted now by greed and malice. Funny. My voice was low, rough. The dry humor was unintentional, born of the sheer absurdity.
No, Clara.
Not funny. But you really didn't know, did you? Know what? Her eyes narrowed. I leaned back in the chair, the initial shock receding, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. She had forged documents. She had found a child, God knows where, maybe a friend's, maybe someone willing to play the part for a cut. She had bribed someone, a lab technician, a clerk, to create those papers. It was elaborate. It was cruel. But it was built on a fundamental, fatal misunderstanding. She thought she knew Robert's secrets.
But she didn't know this secret.
The one that mattered. The one that was undeniable. I stood up, my legs trembling slightly, not from weakness, but from a surge of cold, determined energy. The grief was still a lead weight in my chest, but now it was encased in ice. I wouldn't just grieve Robert. I would defend him. I would defend his memory from this filth. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. My life before, it wasn't extraordinary to anyone but us. It was coffee in the morning, the shared silence of reading in the same room, his hand finding mine under the table at dinner. It was late nights talking about his work, the deals, the risks, the relentless climb to the top. And it was the quiet understanding of our private sorrow, the acceptance that children wouldn't be part of our narrative. We had explored every option years ago. Adoption, fostering, even surrogacy before we made the difficult, mutual decision that our family was complete as it was. During those difficult years, the doctors had been definitive. Robert had a rare condition, a side effect of a childhood illness or maybe just bad luck, that made him permanently infertile. He had undergone tests, consultations, second opinions. It was a closed door. A painful one, but closed. We kept it private. It felt too personal, too vulnerable, to share widely. Only our closest friends knew the struggle, not the final, definitive outcome. Not Clara. Clara had always been competitive, jealous. When I married Robert, when his career took off, she'd been superficially congratulatory, but the envy seethed beneath the surface. She was a struggling artist, always needing money, always hinting, always borrowing and never repaying. I loved her because she was my sister, but I didn't trust her. Not entirely. Not with anything that truly mattered. But I never, in my darkest moments, imagined this. This level of calculated malice, waiting for my husband's death to spring such a monstrous trap. She hadn't even come to the hospital before he died. She hadn't offered a word of comfort afterwards. She'd just shown up at the funeral, a black widow spider in mourning weeds, her eyes scanning the crowd, no doubt assessing the wealth on display. The days following that meeting in the lawyer's office were a blur of disbelief and rising panic. The attorney, Mr. Davidson, a kind, older man who had handled Robert's affairs for decades, was initially cautious. Her claims are disturbing, certainly, he'd said, rubbing his temples. But she has presented documentation. A birth certificate, a DNA test. We need to investigate this thoroughly. Investigate? Robert's sterility wasn't something to investigate.
It was a medical fact.
But proving a negative, proving something didn't happen, especially something deeply private from years ago, felt suddenly overwhelming. Our legal team sprang into action. They hired private investigators. They began the process of challenging the paternity claim. But Clara wasn't passive. She hired a bulldog of a lawyer, sharp and ruthless. They leaked the story to the press. Suddenly, my private grief became a public spectacle. Headlines screamed, "Billionaire's secret love child claims fortune. Widow fights alleged stepdaughter for $100 million. Family feud over tech mogul's estate. The phone rang constantly. Reporters. Friends, some offering support, others asking prying questions, their voices laced with doubt. My own mother, bless her heart, called, confused and tearful. She says it's true, darling. She says Robert visited her, that he swore her to secrecy. Betrayal piled on top of grief. My own mother, swayed by Clara's lies. It highlighted how convincing Clara's performance must be. She was the grieving, wronged mother, protecting her innocent child's future against the cold, heartless widow. I felt isolated.
Trapped.
The luxurious home Robert and I had shared suddenly felt cold and empty, a mausoleum echoing with the silence of his absence and the clamor of this new nightmare. Every corner held a memory, a ghost, now tainted by my sister's avarice. The early struggles were just dealing with the initial shockwave, responding to the press releases from her lawyers, trying to present a united front while my world was crumbling. But Clara and her lawyer were relentless. They flooded the zone with their narrative. They painted me as someone who knew about the child, who had perhaps even tried to hide her existence from Robert while he was alive, now trying to cheat her out of her inheritance after his death. It was a sick, twisted version of events, but it was gaining traction. Legal fees mounted. The initial consultations were expensive. The private investigators, tracing Clara's movements, trying to verify the birth certificate, locate the alleged clinic for the DNA test. It all cost money. A lot of money. My access to Robert's assets was temporarily restricted due to the dispute. I had my own savings, my own business interests, but this was a war of attrition, and her goal was clearly to bleed me dry, emotionally and financially, until I gave up. The legal back and forth was tedious, soul-crushing. Depositions. Interrogatories. Every question felt like a violation, dredging up the most painful parts of my life with Robert, twisting them into something ugly. They asked about our marriage, our intimacy, our private struggles. They tried to paint a picture of a distant husband, a marriage in trouble, making it seem plausible that he might have sought comfort elsewhere, fathered a child in secret. Each question was a needle jabbed into my raw grief. My sister sat across the table in these sessions, sometimes smiling faintly, sometimes looking stern and righteous. Her performance was chillingly good. She looked exhausted, stressed, like a mother fighting tooth and nail for her child. If I had known the truth, I might have believed her. Rising challenges came fast and hard. Her lawyers produced witnesses. A woman claiming to be a former neighbor who had seen Robert visiting Clara's apartment regularly years ago. An old friend of Clara's who knew about the secret relationship. Their stories were flimsy, full of inconsistencies, but they were presented with confidence, adding layers to Clara's fabricated reality. We could poke holes in their testimony, highlight their dubious credibility, but the damage was done. Doubt had been sown. The DNA test she presented became a major battleground. We challenged its validity. Her lawyers insisted it was legitimate, performed by a reputable lab. We demanded chain of custody documents, confirmation of the sample source. They stalled. They obfuscated. It became a game of legal maneuvering, costly and time-consuming. They were buying time, hoping the pressure would break me. And the pressure was immense. Sleep became a luxury. My days were filled with legal meetings, poring over documents, trying to recall details from years ago. My nights were haunted by nightmares of Robert, looking confused, asking me why I wasn't fighting harder. The weight of defending his honor, his truth, rested solely on my shoulders. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about clearing his name, protecting the sanctity of our life together from her poisonous lies. The financial strain was real. Lawyers, investigators, court fees. The bills piled up. I had assets, yes, but accessing the full extent of Robert's estate was tied up in this lawsuit. My own businesses were demanding attention, but I was consumed by this fight. I had to scale back, cut costs. It felt like I was bleeding out slowly, just as she intended. Public opinion was turning. The narrative of the poor, single mother fighting the wealthy widow was powerful. I received hate mail, online abuse. Strangers commented on news articles, calling me greedy, heartless. It hurt more than I expected. I wasn't someone who courted public attention, and being thrust into the spotlight, vilified for defending my deceased husband's truth, was agonizing. Then came the moment the crisis deepened, when everything seemed truly lost. Clara's lawyers filed a motion for summary judgment. They argued that the evidence they presented, the birth certificate, the DNA test, the witness testimonies, was overwhelmingly in their favor and that there was no genuine issue of material fact for trial. They requested that the court declare Lily as Robert's daughter and rightful heir, awarding them half the estate without a full trial. Mr. Davidson was grim. "It's a long shot for them," he explained, "but if the judge grants it, it's over. We have to present compelling evidence that their claims are fraudulent, or at least create enough doubt to warrant a trial." But what evidence? We had challenged their documentation, but we hadn't yet found definitive proof of forgery. We had impeached their witnesses, but their testimonies still stood on the record. And proving Robert's sterility from 15 years ago? The clinic records were archived, difficult to access. The specific doctor might be retired, or worse. It felt like searching for a ghost. I sat in my cold, empty living room, surrounded by photos of Robert, feeling utterly defeated. The legal fight felt abstract, frustratingly slow. Her lies were concrete, devastatingly effective. It felt like she had already won. The sheer exhaustion was crushing me. What if I couldn't find the proof? What if her forged documents held up? What if a judge, bound by legal technicalities, saw only the papers and not the monstrous lie behind them? The thought of losing, not just the money, but seeing Robert's name dragged through the mud, seeing Clara and her fake child inherit the fruits of his labor, of our life, was unbearable. It wasn't just a financial loss. It was an annihilation of our history, our truth. She wasn't just stealing money. She was stealing his legacy, grafting her lie onto his life story. I remember one particularly dark night. I was staring out the window at the city lights, each one a life I didn't touch, couldn't reach. I felt utterly alone. The grief was a dull ache, the fear a sharp one. Clara's face swam before my eyes, the smirk, the triumphant glint. She was winning. She knew it. That night, something shifted inside me. The despair was still there, a deep well, but a spark ignited beside it. A cold, fierce anger unlike anything I had ever felt. It wasn't just anger at Clara. It was anger at the injustice, at the way truth seemed irrelevant in the face of a convincing lie and a good lawyer. I wouldn't let her win. Not like this. Not ever. The legal team was doing their best, but their methods were conventional. They were fighting within the established rules of discovery and evidence. I realized I needed to go deeper. I needed to find the absolute, undeniable truth. Something that couldn't be forged, couldn't be argued away. My turning point was the realization that I had to take control. I stopped waiting for the lawyers to find something. I decided to find it myself. My target, the unassailable proof of Robert's sterility. Not just the clinical records, which might be incomplete or difficult to obtain and verify after so many years, but something connected to the source of that information. The doctor. I spent days, weeks, digging. It felt like being a detective in my own shattered life. I went through Robert's old files, stored in a climate-controlled facility. Boxes and boxes of documents from years ago. Business records, yes, but also personal files. Old tax returns, insurance claims, medical bills. It was a painful process, touching things he had touched, reading notes he had written. Every piece of paper was a memory, a fragment of his life. I was looking for anything, any scrap of information related to those fertility tests years ago. The name of the clinic, the name of the doctor. It was slow, painstaking work. The legal battle was still raging in the background, draining my resources, demanding my time, but my focus narrowed. This was the core of the lie. This was where I could break her. I found it eventually, buried deep in a box of old medical statements, A bill from a urology clinic, dated 15 years ago. The name of the doctor.
Doktor Alan Bennett.
And a reference number for a specific procedure. Finding Dr. Bennett wasn't easy. He had retired years ago. His practice had been absorbed by a larger group. His contact information wasn't publicly available. The legal team couldn't just subpoena a retired doctor without a strong case already built, and we didn't have it yet. I had to go off book. I hired a different kind of investigator, one with fewer scruples about privacy laws. I needed to find Dr. Bennett, talk to him, verify the absolute truth. It felt risky, operating outside the formal legal process, but I was desperate. The motion for summary judgment hearing was looming. Time was running out. The investigator found him. Living quietly in a small town upstate, getting Dr. Bennett to talk was another challenge. He was reluctant to get involved in a legal dispute, especially one involving a deceased patient. He cited patient confidentiality, the passage of time. I pleaded with him. I explained the situation, the monstrous lie my sister was telling, the damage it was doing to Robert's memory, to me. I wasn't asking him to violate confidentiality carelessly. I was asking him to confirm a medical fact that would expose a fraud. I showed him copies of the court documents, the news articles. He saw the scale of the deception. He remembered Robert. He remembered the case. It was a significant diagnosis, he said, not common. He looked through his own archived records, meticulously kept even in retirement. And he found it. The detailed chart. The test results. The confirmation. Robert Sterling was, unequivocally, permanently infertile. He had even undergone a procedure years prior to confirm the diagnosis and rule out any slim possibility of reversal. The procedure involved specific surgical steps that made any natural conception impossible. This was it. This was the unassailable truth. But how to present it in court? Dr. Bennett was willing to provide an affidavit, a sworn statement. But Clara's lawyers would attack it, question his memory, his motives, the validity of his old records. An affidavit might not be enough to stop the summary judgment. I needed him to testify. In person. To look the judge in the eye and state the medical facts. Convincing a retired doctor to travel, to face cross-examination by ruthless lawyers, was hard. It took more time, more pleading. I offered to cover all his expenses, compensate him for his time. More importantly, I appealed to his sense of medical integrity, his duty to truth. He had dedicated his life to medicine, to facts. This was about correcting a grievous wrong, upholding the truth of his diagnosis. He agreed. Reluctantly, but he agreed. The hearing for the motion for summary judgment arrived. The courtroom was packed. Reporters were there, their pens poised. Clara sat at the plaintiff's table, her lawyer beside her, radiating confidence. She glanced at me, a smug, expectant look on her face. She thought she had won. She thought her paper trail, her lies, her relentless pressure had been enough. I sat with Mr. Davidson, trying to project calm I didn't feel. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was the moment. We had filed our opposition to the motion, including Dr. Bennett's affidavit, stating our intention to call him as a witness if the hearing proceeded. Her lawyers had dismissed it in their reply brief, calling it irrelevant and unverified. The hearing began. Clara's lawyer presented their case for summary judgment, confidently reciting their list of evidence: the birth certificate, the DNA report, the witness testimonies. He argued that the weight of evidence was clearly on their side, that there was no credible dispute that Robert was the father of Lily, and that a trial was unnecessary. He painted me as someone trying to obstruct justice out of spite and greed. It was infuriating to listen to, a masterclass in presenting fiction as fact. I could feel my hands trembling. Then it was our turn. Mr. Davidson stood. He didn't focus on attacking her evidence directly at first. Instead, he focused on the core claim, paternity. "Your Honor," he began, his voice steady and clear, "the plaintiffs have presented documents and testimony that, on their face, support a claim of paternity. However, these claims are built on a foundation of deliberate falsehood, a foundation that crumbles completely when confronted with irrefutable medical fact." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. Clara stiffened, her smug expression faltering slightly. "We contend, Your Honor, that Robert Sterling could not, medically, have fathered a child. Not with my client, not with the plaintiff Clara, not with anyone. He was, as confirmed by medical records and the testimony of his treating physician from 15 years ago, permanently and irreversibly sterile." A murmur went through the courtroom. Clara's lawyer was on his feet instantly. "Objection. Speculation. Hearsay. This is unsubstantiated and irrelevant." "Your Honor," Mr. Davidson countered, "it is highly relevant to a claim of paternity. And it is far from unsubstantiated. We have a witness prepared to testify to this medical fact."
Doktor Alan Bennett.
He gestured towards the back of the courtroom. A quiet, elderly man, Dr. Bennett, rose from his seat and walked towards the witness stand. Clara's face went pale. She turned to her lawyer, whispering furiously. Her lawyer looked blindsided, scrambling through his papers. They had clearly not anticipated this. They had received the affidavit, yes, but they had dismissed it as a bluff, or maybe they hadn't believed we could get the actual doctor to appear. This wasn't just a piece of paper. This was a living, breathing witness to the truth. Dr. Bennett was sworn in. Mr. Davidson led him through his qualifications, his long career in urology, his practice years ago. Then he asked him if he had treated Robert Sterling. "Yes, I did," Dr. Bennett confirmed, his voice quiet but clear. "And what was the nature of that treatment?" Dr. Bennett explained in calm, medical terms the diagnosis, the tests, the irreversible condition. He referenced his patient charts, which we had subpoenaed and verified. He described the specific procedure Robert had undergone that eliminated any possibility of him fathering a child. He was precise, professional, and utterly credible. He looked at the judge, then briefly at Clara. "Based on my medical findings and the procedure performed," he stated, his voice firm, "it was medically impossible for Robert Sterling to have conceived a child at any point after my diagnosis and treatment." The courtroom was silent. Clara was frozen, her eyes wide with disbelief and dawning horror. Her lawyer was flipping through documents frantically, his face a mask of shock. Mr. Davidson turned to Clara's lawyer. "Given Dr. Bennett's testimony and verified medical records, which directly contradict the possibility of Mr. Sterling fathering a child, we request that the plaintiff's motion for summary judgment be denied and, furthermore, that their paternity claim be dismissed outright based on irrefutable medical evidence." The judge, a stern woman who had presided over many cases, listened intently. She asked Dr. Bennett a few clarifying questions, which he answered directly and confidently. His testimony was solid. It wasn't based on memory alone. It was backed by 15-year-old clinical records that had been verified as authentic. Then, she turned to Clara's lawyer. "Counselor, in light of Dr. Bennett's sworn testimony and the medical evidence presented, do you have any evidence to refute the medical impossibility of Mr. Sterling fathering a child?" Clara's lawyer stammered, visibly shaken. He could try to cross-examine Dr. Bennett, but what could he ask? Questioning a highly respected doctor about a documented medical fact from his own records was a losing battle. He had no medical expert of his own to counter this, no alternative medical explanation. His entire case rested on forged documents and fabricated testimonies, all premised on the assumption that Robert could have fathered a child. That assumption had just been medically annihilated. He glanced at Clara, who was shaking her head frantically, mouthing something silent and desperate. He knew he was cornered. "Your Honor, we require time to review this new evidence," he sputtered, clearly trying to buy time, to find an escape route. The judge was unmoved. "This evidence is not new, Counselor. It pertains to a fundamental, verifiable fact regarding the alleged father. The plaintiffs have based their entire claim on Mr. Sterling's presumed ability to procreate. Dr. Bennett's testimony, supported by medical records, directly contradicts this premise." She looked down at her notes for a long moment. The silence in the courtroom stretched, tense and heavy. Clara was staring at me now, her eyes filled with a mixture of fury and despair. The smug triumph was gone, replaced by the look of a trapped animal. She hadn't just been blindsided, she had been utterly demolished. She thought she had covered every angle, the fake birth certificate, the phony DNA test, the bribed witnesses. But she had overlooked the one thing she couldn't fake, couldn't bribe away: Robert's irreversible medical condition. She hadn't known the real secret. The judge finally looked up. Her voice was firm, decisive. Based on the compelling and credible medical testimony presented by Dr. Bennett, which establishes the medical impossibility of the deceased, Robert Sterling, fathering a child, the plaintiff's claim of paternity is fundamentally invalidated. She picked up her gavel. The motion for summary judgment is denied.
Thwack.
The sound echoed through the courtroom. Clara gasped. Furthermore, the judge continued, her voice rising, as the entire basis for the plaintiff's claim to the estate rests on this now disproven paternity, the court finds that the plaintiff's case lacks merit. She looked directly at Clara and her lawyer. The paternity claim is dismissed. With prejudice.
Thwack. Dismissed.
With prejudice. Meaning it couldn't be brought again. It was over.
Just like that.
Her entire elaborate scheme, her monstrous lie, collapsed under the weight of a simple, undeniable medical truth from 15 years ago. Clara stared, her mouth agape. Her lawyer looked like he had been struck by lightning. The reporters in the room were scribbling furiously. The courtroom buzzed with a sudden explosion of murmurs. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, so profound it almost buckled my knees. It was over. Robert's name was cleared. His truth was upheld. Clara lunged forward slightly, crying out,
No.
"That's not true. He's lying. She's lying." Her carefully constructed composure shattered completely. She was raw fury and desperation now. The judge's voice was sharp. "Order. The court has made its ruling based on presented evidence. The plaintiff's claim is dismissed." Clara started sobbing, deep, guttural sobs, no longer fake. Her lawyer tried to calm her, but she was inconsolable, her entire wicked plan having blown up in her face so spectacularly, so unexpectedly. She had gambled everything on a lie, and she had lost everything to the truth she never knew. The aftermath was swift and brutal for Clara. The news of the dismissal spread like wildfire. Her carefully crafted image as the wronged mother evaporated, replaced by headlines exposing her as a fraud, a greedy sister who tried to steal from her deceased brother-in-law using a fake child. The little girl, Lily, wasn't hers either. It turned out Clara had borrowed her from a distant acquaintance, promising a cut of the inheritance. The birth certificate and DNA test were confirmed as sophisticated forgeries. The witnesses were found to have been paid for their false testimony. Clara faced legal repercussions for fraud and perjury. The police were involved. Her lawyer, his reputation damaged, reportedly dropped her as a client immediately after the hearing. She lost everything. Her reputation was ruined. The financial stability she craved was further out of reach than ever. Her relationships, what little she had left, were destroyed. The family who had initially doubted me saw the truth, saw her truth, and recoiled. For me, the immediate aftermath was exhaustion. The adrenaline that had fueled me for months drained away, leaving me hollowed out. The legal victory was immense, undeniable, but it didn't bring Robert back. It didn't erase the months of stress, the public humiliation, the deep wound of my sister's betrayal. Mr. Davidson handled the final legal details, ensuring Clara could never contest anything again. The estate was settled according to Robert's will. His fortune, rightfully, was mine. But the money felt different now, tainted by the battle fought over it. It wasn't just wealth, it was a monument to Robert, and a symbol of the darkness his death had unleashed. I began the slow process of rebuilding. The house felt less cold, the silence less heavy, but the scar remained. The trust one had in my own family, in the bonds of sisterhood, was irrevocably broken. Clara had shown me a depth of human cruelty I never wanted to see, especially not from someone who shared my blood. Grief returned, but it was a cleaner grief now, unsullied by the fight. I mourned Robert, remembered our life, our quiet joy, our shared secret that ultimately saved me. It was bittersweet. The truth had set me free from her lies, but the truth itself was rooted in a pain we had shared, a pain I now carried alone. I learned that truth, even a quiet, hidden truth, can be the most powerful weapon against the loudest, most convincing lie. I learned that family isn't always blood, and that betrayal can come from the places you expect it least. And I learned a resilience I never knew I possessed, forged in the fire of grief and betrayal. The victory was cold, hard, and complete. She thought she could steal his legacy. She thought she could crush me. But she didn't know the one thing that made her entire scheme impossible. She didn't know my Robert.
And she didn't know me.
If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.